Hello everybody, I am Evelil and I will tell you one story of a good viewing. The village of Azkerville had always been a place of whispering trees, thick fog, and superstition. Nestled at the edge of a forgotten forest, it stood isolated, its inhabitants bound by a shared history of eerie traditions and shadowed rituals. Despite the harsh winters, the villagers never complained. They had seen too much to voice any discomfort. The most unsettling of their customs, however, was the belief in the 13th Zodiac. The legend had been passed down through generations, often dismissed as mere folklore, but every so often the village would hold its breath, waiting for the signs to appear. It was said that the 13th Zodiac was a celestial entity, not like the other 12, which guided the fates of mankind. This Zodiac was different. It was cursed, a curse older than time itself, and its coming was a harbinger of death and madness. But this year was different. The full moon had been high in the sky for days, casting an unsettling red hue over Azkerville. The villagers knew what it meant, the blood moon was upon them. They were about to face the reckoning of the 13th Zodiac. It began with strange happenings, small at first, barely noticeable. The wind would howl at odd hours and the trees would sway without reason even in the dead of night. Animals started disappearing. Dogs howled in the distance, their cries stretching through the fog like a warning. One by one, livestock vanished only to be found later, mangled and shredded, their bodies twisted in unnatural ways. The village elders were silent, but their eyes betrayed fear. The younger folk whispered nervously in the corners of taverns and inns, wondering aloud whether they would live to see the dawn. No one dared ask about the 13th Zodiac. On the eve of the blood moon, the sky turned an unnatural crimson, the color of blood spilled long ago. The village seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something, anything, to break the silence. Then, at the stroke of midnight, a single bell tolled from the old church at the center of town. Its sound was wrong, hollow, deep, as if mourning something ancient and forgotten. The ground trembled. A low growl rumbled from the forest. It was not the sound of an animal, it was something deeper, something more primal. Eliza Markham stood by the window of her cottage, staring out at the looming forest. Her breath fogged up the glass as she pressed her forehead against it, eyes wide with anticipation. Her family had lived in Azkerville for generations, but even she had never felt the weight of the curse like this before. She could feel it in the air, thick and suffocating. The darkness seemed to creep closer with every passing minute. Her husband, Thomas, had gone out earlier to check on their cattle, but he hadn't returned. The clock ticked loudly in the silence, each passing second tightening the grip around her chest. Her fingers twitched, itching to reach for the old family heirloom her mother had given her, a silver pendant inscribed with ancient symbols. The pendant, her mother had told her, was the only protection the family had against the 13th Zodiac. Where it always, her mother had whispered before her death, her voice shaking. Never let it leave you. Not even for a moment. It will keep you safe from the curse. From the Zodiac. But Eliza hadn't worn it for years. She had left it buried in the bottom of her drawer, convinced the stories were just that, stories. Until now. Now, the air was thick with something more than superstition. Her breath caught in her throat as a sudden, loud knock rattled the door. Eliza! Eliza! Thomas's voice echoed through the small house, frantic, desperate. Open the door. She rushed to the door and threw it open, her heart pounding in her chest. But what stood before her was not her husband. A man, no, not a man, stood in the doorway, his face pale and covered in blood. His clothes were torn and his eyes were wide with terror, but it wasn't Thomas. It was someone else, someone she didn't recognize. His mouth opened in a silent scream, but no sound came out. Blood oozed from his mouth and his skin seemed to shift unnaturally as though something beneath it was moving. Her legs buckled beneath her and she stumbled back, horror flooding her senses. Where's Thomas? She choked out, her voice barely a whisper. The man staggered forward, his head jerking unnaturally to the side. His eyes fixed on her, and for a moment the blood in her veins ran cold. She felt the presence of something old, ancient, something that had been awakened. The 13th Zodiac had come. Without another word, the man collapsed onto the floor. His body convulsed violently and a low, guttural noise filled the air. Eliza backed away, her heart racing. It was happening. The curse was upon them. Suddenly, the man's eyes snapped open. His pupils had disappeared, replaced by swirling, glowing symbols that she recognized, symbols from the ancient family texts, from the stories of the Zodiac. They were the markings of the 13th. The man's lips parted once more, but this time, the words that came out were not human. Run! Eliza! Run! A cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles on the table. The man's body jerked again, and with a sickening crack, his neck twisted backward. His body then dissolved into a cloud of smoke, leaving nothing but the faintest trace of blood on the floor. Eliza stood frozen in place, her breath catching in her throat. She had to move. She had to do something. Outside, the sky was turning black, the blood moon's light now obscured by thick, swirling clouds. And in the distance she saw them, figures emerging from the forest. At first, they appeared to be mere shadows, but then the shapes took form. Tall, hulking, impossibly thin figures, their limbs elongated and twisted. Their faces were pale, hollow, and empty, save for glowing symbols etched into their skin, pulsating in time with the beating of her own heart. The Zodiac was coming. A scream broke through the air, the voice unmistakable. It was Thomas. Eliza ran towards the door, but as her hand touched the handle, she was struck by a sudden, overwhelming force. She was thrown backward, slamming into the wall with bone-shattering force. She gasped for air, trying to regain her bearings, but before she could move, she saw it, the figure standing at the edge of the door. The 13th Zodiac. It was a creature of nightmares, its form ever-shifting, a nightmare made flesh. Its eyes glowed a piercing red, and its mouth stretched impossibly wide, dripping with black ichor. It reached out toward her with elongated fingers, each one tipped with claws that seemed to distort reality itself. Eliza's vision blurred, her limbs heavy with dread. The creature's voice was like a whisper, though its lips did not move. Eliza Markham, it rasped, the sound like the scraping of bones. You cannot escape what has already begun. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the creature vanished, leaving Eliza alone in the silence, the blood-stained floor beneath her. She had no choice but to run. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest as she bolted from the cottage, the door left hanging open behind her. The air felt wrong, suffocating, thick with the unnatural stillness of the cursed night. She stumbled over the uneven ground, her legs trembling beneath her as if the very earth itself was rejecting her. The dark forest loomed ahead, its trees swaying in a rhythm that didn't belong to nature. She could hear the sounds now, the whispers echoing through the wind. The voices of the village, those who had disappeared, those who had been consumed by the curse. Their voices calling to her, their mournful wails mixing with the relentless growls of creatures hidden deep in the shadows. Run, the words that the man had whispered to her echoed in her mind. But where could she run? The village was surrounded by the forest, and beyond the forest was nothing but more darkness, endless and swallowing. The 13th Zodiac wasn't a thing to flee from, it was a thing that found you. But there was one place she knew she had to go. The ancient chapel at the heart of the village. The chapel where her ancestors had worshipped, where her mother had prayed when the curse first took root. It was their last sanctuary, their final hope. If anyone could protect her now, it would be the chapel. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she ran, her boots slapping against the wet ground. The blood moon above had turned the night into a living nightmare, its crimson glow casting twisted shadows on everything around her. The distant howls and shrieks grew louder, closer, like a storm of nightmares gathering. In the periphery of her vision, she saw them. Figures moving through the fog. She knew what they were, the creatures. The servants of the 13th Zodiac. Their bodies were long, unnaturally thin, their faces gaunt and blank, hollow. They moved in jerking, disjointed motions like marionettes controlled by an unseen hand. Each one bore the same markings, glowing symbols that pulsed with an eerie rhythm. Her pulse quickened, but she couldn't afford to stop. She had to reach the chapel. Her feet barely touched the ground as she sprinted, her mind racing. Thoughts of Thomas, of the others who had fallen, filled her with dread, but there was nothing she could do for them now. The only chance she had was to reach the chapel and find the pendant, the last hope her mother had left her. A sudden shriek split the air. Eliza froze, her blood turning to ice. The sound was close, too close. She turned, but there was nothing there. Yet, the feeling of eyes watching her, of something closing in, was inescapable. A deep, guttural voice echoed from the trees. It was not human. Eliza Markham, you cannot escape the Zodiac. You cannot escape your fate. Her breath caught in her throat. The voice, she knew it. It was the 13th Zodiac speaking directly into her mind. The realization hit her like a hammer. It had always been watching, always been waiting. And now it was coming for her. The ground beneath her feet trembled as something large and heavy moved in the darkness ahead. The air grew thick, suffocating, and Eliza felt as though the very atmosphere was pressing in on her, urging her to stop. She stumbled forward, shaking with terror, but something within her, something deep, refused to give in. She couldn't stop. She couldn't let it win. She reached the chapel just as the first of the creatures emerged from the fog. Its face was nothing more than an empty void, but its eyes, the glowing, pulsating eyes, were fixed on her. It lunged, and Eliza screamed, narrowly dodging its claws as they scraped the air where she had been a moment ago. The door to the chapel creaked open as though inviting her in. Without a second thought, she darted inside, slamming the door behind her. The thick wooden door rattled against the impact of something heavy outside, but it held. For now. The chapel was dark and cold, its stone walls lined with faded symbols and carvings that seemed to writhe in the dim light of the blood moon filtering through the stained glass windows. The air was thick with the scent of incense, but it wasn't comforting. It was foul, like something had died here long ago and was now beginning to rot. At the altar stood the old relic, a pedestal with a single, dusty book on it. The book her mother had told her about. The Book of the Zodiac, the very same book that held the key to breaking the curse. Eliza rushed toward it, her hands shaking as she fumbled to open it. The pages were yellowed, the ink smeared with age, but the symbols were still clear. The pages told of the 12 zodiac signs and the 13th. The 13th was different. It wasn't bound by the stars, it was bound by blood, by death. Its power came from sacrifice, from the lives it took and the suffering it spread. Her fingers traced the symbols on the page. There had to be something, anything, to stop it. The book spoke of a ritual, a final act of defiance, but it was incomplete. The last page was torn. Eliza, the voice whispered again, so close she could almost feel its breath on her neck. You cannot hide from what is already yours. The temperature in the chapel dropped sharply, the air becoming thick and suffocating. Her hands trembled as she closed the book and stepped back. The altar flickered in the blood-red light, casting long shadows across the room. The ground beneath her feet began to shake again, harder this time. Something massive was coming. Suddenly, the chapel door slammed open and Eliza gasped. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure cloaked in shadows, its form indistinct, yet its eyes burned with that same unholy light. It was the 13th Zodiac. Its body stretched impossibly tall, its limbs bent and broken at odd angles. Its face, no, it had no face. Just those glowing symbols, swirling and shifting in the air, wrapping around its skull like a crown of darkness. Its voice came again, deep and terrible. Eliza Markham. You are the last. You are the one who will set us free. You are the one who will end the bloodline. It stepped forward, its long fingers reaching toward her. As it did, the symbols on its skin flashed, and Eliza felt an overwhelming wave of terror wash over her. The room seemed to close in, and for a moment she thought she might suffocate from the sheer weight of its presence. But then, as though by instinct, her hand shot to her chest. The pendant. The silver pendant. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, never let it leave you. She tore it from around her neck, holding it up to the 13th Zodiac. The creature recoiled, a hiss of fury escaping from its gaping mouth. The pendant glowed with a brilliant light, so bright it seemed to burn away the shadows themselves. The creature screamed, a terrible, agonizing sound, and its body began to twist and writhe as though it was being pulled apart by some invisible force. The ground cracked beneath it and the chapel began to shake violently. Eliza! You cannot stop it. You cannot stop. The creature's voice dissolved into an inhuman screech as it collapsed, its form disintegrating into a cloud of darkness. For a moment, everything was still. The blood-red moon shone through the windows, casting its ominous glow over the chapel, but the creature was gone. Eliza stood there, panting, her heart racing. The air was thick with the remnants of its presence, but the threat was over. For now. But as the chapel's silence settled, a new realization crept into her mind. The 13th Zodiac was not gone. Not truly. It had merely been driven back. And it would return. Thank you very much and see you all in the next video. Love you guys.